Indeed, India Live, India's voice to the world. I'm Preeti Kaur. Coming up in the next 30 minutes, the Colorado Supreme Court disqualifies former President Donald Trump from ballot in the state's presidential primary next year over his role in the January 6, 2021 attack on the U.S. Capitol by his supporters. United Nations Security Council delays vote on a resolution calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. Many UN members call for addressing humanitarian situation in Gaza, but US says resolution fails to sufficiently address Israeli security concerns. Venezuela and Guyana reached truce over territorial dispute, but their Latin American neighbors wonder how long the truce will hold. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi virtually interacts with finale participants of Smart India Hackathon. Late last evening, highlights the role of youth in nation building. South Africa level series 1 each with the win in second ODI against India. Tony D. Zorzi scores the maiden ODI ton. The Colorado Supreme Court ruled on Tuesday that former President Donald Trump cannot be on the ballot in next year's state presidential election due to his involvement in the January 6, 2021 attack on the U.S. Capitol by his supporters. The 4-3 ruling from the Colorado Supreme Court makes Trump the first U.S. presidential candidate to be ruled ineligible for the presidency under a rarely used provision of the U.S. Constitution that prohibits officials from holding office if they have taken part in an insurrection or a rebellion. The Colorado court said the ruling is stayed until January 4th next year to allow for appeals. Trump's campaign called the court decision flawed and undemocratic and said it would be appealed. New York Governor Kathy Hochul authorized a commission to consider reparations for the state's role in perpetuating historic discrimination against African Americans, making New York the second U.S. state to launch such an effort. The state will not be required to follow the recommendation of the commission. New York lawmakers and civil rights activists who attended Hochul's signing ceremony at the New York Historical Society in Manhattan hailed it as a key step towards confronting the state's legacy of slavery and resulting racial gaps in wealth, employment, and criminal justice. The first U.S. state task force to research and develop reparation proposals for African Americans was launched in California in 2020. Guinea government has warned people to brace for power cuts as the country grapples with the aftermath of a deadly explosion at an oil terminal in the capital Conakry that destroyed fuel tanks and forced hundreds of people to flee damaged homes. 14 people were killed and 190 were injured in the blast at the West African nation's main oil terminal, which rocked the Kaloum district in downtown Conakry. In its first update on the extent of the damage to the terminal, the government said 13 fuel tanks were out of service while 5 tanks were unaffected. The extent of the fallout from the blast is not yet clear, or whether mining operations will be affected. The United Nations Security Council has delayed a vote on a resolution calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. Many UN members say the move is vital to address humanitarian situation in the Palestinian enclave, but the United States has expressed concerns that the text fails to sufficiently address Israeli security concerns. William Denslow gets us more from the UN headquarters in New York.
Tuesday was another frustrating day at the United Nations as diplomats continue to wrangle over the language in a draft resolution on the situation in Gaza. Earlier this week, we saw this draft presented that had a call for the urgent suspension of hostilities to allow safe and unhindered humanitarian access. But what we understand from reports is that the United States has had real issues with some of the language in this draft resolution and wants it watered down. It's understood that the draft included the phrase urgent steps towards a sustainable cessation of hostilities. It's understood that Washington has an issue with the reference to cessation of hostilities. So that has been a major stumbling block for diplomats at the United Nations. UN officials on Tuesday expressed the dire need for more humanitarian access into the Palestinian enclave. The UN estimates that around 85% of people in Gaza are now internally displaced. They warned that UN humanitarian groups working on the ground there are on the brink of collapse. UN officials say that the situation for civilians, they say that the impact has been unbearable for them, really imploring council members to come together and to pass a meaningful resolution to get more humanitarian access into the Gaza Strip and really try and see more protection of civilians going forward. We have heard on Tuesday from Robert Wood, who is the US Alternative Representative for Special Political Affairs. Now, he said to the press on Tuesday afternoon here in New York that efforts were continuing with other members of the Security Council to work on the draft text. He said, we'll see how discussions go. He says they're working on the issues and that we will see what happens. William Denslow in New York, reporting for DD India.
Meanwhile, the United States has said that they're working with countries on the United Nations Security Council to resolve outstanding issues related to a draft resolution.
We are engaging constructively with our colleagues on the Security Council to resolve outstanding issues related to that resolution. We fully support addressing the humanitarian needs of the people of Gaza, as this resolution should set out to do, and we're working through these issues with other countries on the Security Council.
Iran-backed Houthi rebels have defied U.S. efforts to protect commercial ships in the Red Sea by promising more attack on the vessels. The group says it will only stop if Israel suspends its military campaign in Gaza. Nick Harper reports from Washington on this.
The increase in attacks in the Red Sea has led the United States to create a multinational naval operation to try and counter the barrage of missiles and drones coming from the Houthis based in Yemen. The fear is the continued attacks on commercial vessels spread the current Israel-Hamas conflict further into the wider region. US Secretary of State Lloyd Austin announced the joint naval operation while in Bahrain, saying it was an international challenge that demands collective action. It's been nicknamed Operation Prosperity Guardian, with at least 9 other countries helping to take part in the patrols, including Bahrain, Canada, France and Italy. But despite that, the Houthis say attacks will continue, perhaps as often as every 12 hours, until Israel ends its fight against Hamas. The group also says more food and medicine needs to get to Palestinians in Gaza. The attacks have prompted some companies, including oil giant BP, to reroute their vessels away from the Red Sea, opting for routes that involve longer journey times and therefore increased costs. Oil prices have risen as a result of the news. About 12% of the world's shipping trade passes through the Suez Canal and the Red Sea each year. Nick Harper in Washington, reporting for DD India.
The United Nations have also warned of negative impact on shipping costs and eventually leads to higher prices for consumer goods if disruption in Suez Canal continues.
If you have systematically higher shipping costs for manufactured goods, the consumer goods that you and I buy in the shop, it takes many months to really translate into higher prices. But it will come. So if this situation continues, it will have a bearing also on the prices we pay in the shop for our consumer goods.
French lawmakers approved a much-debated immigration bill on Tuesday, with both houses of parliament giving their final approval to strict provisions that reduce welfare payments for foreigners in particular. The bill, termed a compromise reached between Macron's party and the conservative opposition, illustrates the rightward shift in politics in much of Europe as governments try to fend off the rise of far right by being tougher on immigration. The new bill also introduces migration quotas, making it harder for immigrants' children to become French. And also it says that dual nationals sentenced for serious crimes against the police could lose French citizenship. United Nations officials have called on North Korea to comply with international law after it launched ballistic missiles over the weekend. At a briefing on Tuesday, members of the UN Security Council urged Pyongyang to commit to denuclearization, but Russia and China criticized fellow members for being one-sided. Sally Patterson gets us details from New York, where the UN is headquartered.
North Korea now has weapons capable of reaching most points on Earth. That was the stark warning from UN Assistant Secretary General for the Middle East, Asia and the Pacific, Mohammed Khalid Kyari, on Tuesday. Pyongyang's intercontinental ballistic missile, launched on December 18th, flew around 1,000 kilometers before falling into the sea. Kyari said North Korea did not issue any warnings before the launch, calling that a serious risk to aviation and maritime traffic. He said it was imperative to de-escalate the situation on the Korean peninsula and urged Pyongyang to engage in diplomacy, not isolation. Several UN Security Council members called for North Korea to reopen lines of communication and to abandon its nuclear and ballistic missiles programs. The US's alternate permanent representative, Robert Wood, said every council member needed to condemn the missile launches and meaningfully hold Pyongyang to account. He called on Russia and China to join the rest of the council in doing so, while the UK accused those two countries of shielding their ally. But Russia accused the Council of being one-sided and, along with China, condemned the US's so-called show of force in the region. Sally Patterson in New York, reporting for DD India.
Russia has warned Finland of retaliatory measures after Helsinki signed a new defense agreement with Washington. Moscow's ties with a Nordic neighbor have significantly deteriorated since Finland decided to join NATO. DD India correspondent Dasha Chernyshova is in Moscow with more on this.
Russia has summoned Finland's ambassador on Tuesday over the signing of a new defense agreement between Helsinki and Washington. Russian officials have informed the ambassador that Moscow would take the necessary measures to counter what it sees as aggressive decisions of Finland and its NATO allies. Foreign Ministry spokesperson Maria Zakharova said in a statement that growing NATO military presence near the Russian border is a grave concern for Moscow and will not be left unanswered. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov earlier said that the possible deployment of the American military infrastructure so close to the Russian border is a threat to Russia and will lead to growing tension between the two countries. Peskov said that Moscow and Helsinki used to have excellent relations. Now that Finland is a member of NATO, Russia has created two new military districts of Leningrad and Moscow. Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu said on Tuesday that Moscow will boost its army to 1.5 million personnel, proportionate to the foreign threats. Dasha Chernyshova, reporting in Moscow for DD India.
Let's get to other updates now that are making it to the headlines from across the world. A small pinata workshop located near Mexico City employed Venezuelan migrants during their Christmas season activities. Pinatas are broken during Mexican posadas, which are small get-togethers to commemorate Mary and Joseph's search for shelter on Christmas Eve before the birth of Jesus Christ. Despite a volcanic eruption late on Monday, on the Reykjanes Peninsula, Iceland's Keflavik International Airport was functional as usual, amid warning of potential gas pollution in the area of Reykjavik late on Tuesday or Wednesday morning. Tourists expressed a mixture of fascination and concern, but felt reassured by the news of intensity of the eruption dropping. Peruvian authorities seized 4,001 live turtle specimens bound for Indonesia after discovering anomalies in a shipment's documentation. According to the information from National Forestry and Wildlife Service, following the seizure, all the animals were handed over in temporary custody to an authorized breeding center in Lima. Two abandoned miners from Guinea were found in Bogota's El Dorado International Airport on separate dates, the Colombian authorities informed on Tuesday. A search for their families is being carried out by the migration officials. Both children had arrived from Istanbul and had connection to El Salvador. You're watching DD India Live. Up next, a short break. But after the break, amid truce between Venezuela and Guyana over territorial dispute, Latin American neighbors left wondering about its longevity. UK government says a 14th round of negotiations with India on a free trade deal will take place next month. Stay with us as we get you an update on the latest negotiations. We will get you details about what LSE professor has to say about reforms and what's driving India's economic engine towards sustainable growth.
In a world that never stops, where information shapes our reality, one app stands out, helps you stay ahead of time. Introducing the DD India app, your gateway to a world of news right at your fingertips. Your most trusted source of news goes global, goes digital. Explore a world of options, top stories, live updates, in-depth analysis, and more. Stay informed wherever you are. Real-time alerts keep you ahead of the curve always. The DD India app, connecting you to the world, one story at a time. Download now and explore the world of knowledge, insights, and authentic information.
Welcome back after the break. You're watching DD India Live and I'm Preeti. Let's get to more international updates. A territorial dispute in a corner of Latin America has sparked international alarm in recent weeks. There is now relief that Venezuela and Guyana have reached a truce, but their Latin American neighbors have been left wondering how long will it hold. DD India's Latin America correspondent, Maritrini Mena, reports on this.
This was the handshake that signaled compromise. A pledge not to use force to resolve a dispute going back 100 years. The territory in question, the Essequibo, in the Amazon jungle, which counts for 2/3 of modern-day Guyana.
Agreed that Guyana and Venezuela, directly or indirectly, will not threaten or use force against one another in any circumstances, including those consequential to any existing controversies between the two states.
The border dispute began in the late 1800s, when Guyana, a former British colony, established its borders. Ever since then, Venezuela has contested the legality of Guyana's boundaries. The Geneva Agreement of 1966 sought to settle the conflict.
El Acuerdo de Ginebra se firmó ese año.
The Geneva Agreement was signed that year, which sets out a practical and equitable agreement between the parties. Why has it not been solved? Because Guyana has always refused to negotiate.
In 2018, Guyana went further and took the dispute to the International Court of Justice, a court Venezuela doesn't recognize. Over the last decade, Guyana's oil output and revenues have grown dramatically. By contrast, Venezuela sank deeper into economic crisis. Caracas asserted its territorial claim more aggressively. In December, Venezuela held a referendum to approve the creation of a new Venezuelan state. Just days after the vote, President Maduro presented a new map adding the Essequibo, and he ordered state-owned companies to drill for oil and gas in the disputed region.
Venezuela is talking about granting concessions for claimed areas that are mostly offshore, which is fundamentally where the problem lies. What is difficult is to find companies interested in an area that is in dispute.
The territorial dispute has alarmed Venezuela's neighbors, prompting Brazil to take a lead in negotiations. Some analysts say President Maduro is trying to create a distraction from his own economic problems and stroke national unity.
Even though I believe it's highly unlikely that this could end in a war or an armed conflict, you can't rule it out when a government is using and waving the flag of patriotism and nationalism in an effort to unite a country behind itself.
Which is why many fear the truce will not hold. For now, Venezuela is getting ready for a new meeting with Guyana over the Essequibo and upcoming presidential elections, both in 2024. In Caracas, Maritrini Mena, reporting for DD India.
Brazilian First Lady Rosângela Yanja Lula da Silva said on Tuesday that she will sue Elon Musk-owned social media platform X after having her account hacked last week. The alleged hacker entered her account on December 11th and posted several messages including insults against the First Lady and President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva. She also called on Brazil to regulate social media platforms, saying they must be held accountable for their users' actions. Lula agreed that social media regulation was needed globally, but voiced his concerns around the complexities of the issue. More protesters joined the third week of demonstrations in Bratislava against government plans to fast-track criminal law reforms that include scrapping the Special Prosecutor's Office focused on corruption. The European Commission has warned it will take action against Slovakia if it violates EU laws. Fico, a four-time premier who resigned in 2018 amid mass protests against corruption that followed the murder of an investigative journalist, has accused the Special Prosecutor's Office of being politically motivated and has said its actions in fact violated human rights. The government has sought to enact the legislation by Christmas, but government officials have said a vote could shift to January. Hundreds of Serbian opposition supporters rallied outside the State Election Commission in Belgrade as opposition leaders went on hunger strike in the commission headquarters. Demonstrators demanded the recent snap parliamentary elections be rerun amid accusations of voter registration fraud, bribery and results rigging. An international monitoring mission said the country's ruling Serbian Progressive Party had gained an unfair advantage in the elections through media bias and irregularities such as vote buying. The populist SNS won 46.72% of the votes in Sunday's elections. The Serbia Against Violence Alliance came second with 23.56% of the votes, and the Socialist Party of Serbia came third with 6.56%. The United Kingdom government says a 14th round of negotiations with India on a free trade deal will take place next month, that is January 2024. Britain's Parliament has received an update on the latest negotiations, as Ollie Bharat reports from London.
The update comes in the form of a written ministerial statement from Greg Hands, who is Minister of State for Trade Policy. He says the 13th round of free trade agreement talks wrapped up on the 15th of December, with negotiations having taken place in London and in Delhi in what is described as a hybrid fashion. The minister says that a comprehensive and ambitious FTA remains the goal, and he insists that a balanced deal can strengthen the economic links between London and India. Greg Hands' update says that the 13th round of talks focused on issues around goods, services and investment, and that the UK government, in his words, will not compromise on things like environmental, animal welfare, food and labour protections. And his statement stresses that there are no plans to change our immigration policy. The minister has confirmed that the next round of FTA talks will start in January 2024. Ollie Bharat in London, reporting for DD India.
According to a recent IMF report, India is projected to contribute more than 16% to global growth and has emerged as one of the star performers. Jessica Taneja spoke with Robin Burgess, economic professor of the London School of Economics, about potential reforms and what's driving India's economic engine towards sustainable growth. Let's listen in.
How do you look at India's economic growth in the future? It's going to be the third largest economy. It's projected to become the third largest economy. It's still pacing. And what more do you think India needs to do to have more reforms? It already expressed that there have to be certain multilateral institutions that need reformation, including the United Nations, in order to be able to address the needs of the emerging economy, aka the global south as well. India has taken a stand at that point, but with its economic engines now working in full capacity, what do you think would aid that growth?
I think there's a couple of broad areas. One is this very simple transition from agriculture into services and manufacturing. And that is obviously a source of growth because people become more productive. But I think the bigger factor is once they move out of agriculture into some form of firm, India has been successful in having a huge mass of small firms and then some big firms. And there's going to be a need for sort of some of those small firms to be encouraged to grow to become bigger firms. And that sort of, people talk about infrastructure, they talk about regulation. But that sort of, I guess, encouragement of entrepreneurship is going to be a big factor.
Across India, a transformative movement is taking root. The Viksit Bharat Sankalp Yatra, the largest ever outreach initiative of Government of India, is bringing the promise of empowerment and a brighter future to the doorsteps of all the Indians. In the series, of the Yatra or the journey, it reached the Balia Panchayat of Udhampur in the Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir. There it was held at Santishwar Bharatiya Vidya Mandir School, where locals welcomed the van and also listened to the message of Prime Minister Narendra Modi and his vision of making India a developed nation by 2047. Government departments set up stalls to advertise various welfare schemes. Resource persons shared information about the government schemes with the visitors. The Indian government's flagship program, Viksit Bharat Sankalp Yatra, is being undertaken across the country with an aim to attain saturation of government schemes by ensuring that the benefits of the schemes reach the intended beneficiaries in a time-bound manner. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi interacted with the finale participants of Smart India Hackathon on Tuesday late evening via video conferencing. Smart India Hackathon is a nationwide initiative to provide students a platform to solve the pressing problems of ministries and departments of the government, industries and other organizations. This year, the grand finale of the hackathon is being held from 19th to 23rd of December. Addressing the participants, Prime Minister highlighted the role of youth in nation building.
स्मार्ट इंडिया हैकाथॉन में मेहनत आप लोग करते हैं, लेकिन सीखने का अवसर मुझे भी मिलता है। इसलिए मैं कोशिश करता हूं कि जब भी स्मार्ट इंडिया हैकाथॉन हो रहा हो, आपसे संवाद जरूर करूं। आज भी आप सुबह से ही जुटे हैं, इसके बावजूद आपके चेहरे पर एक ताजगी है, एक उत्साह है। यही ताजगी, यही उत्साह, यही आत्मविश्वास, नेशन बिल्डिंग की इच्छा शक्ति आज भारत की युवा शक्ति की पहचान बन चुकी है।
South Africa pulled level in the three-match ODI series against India with an 8-wicket win at St. George's Oval. South Africa bundled out India for a total of 211 runs in 46.2 overs before managing to chase down the target in 42.3 overs. Batting first, India lost Ruturaj Gaikwad on the second ball of the match after being put into bat first. Sai Sudarshan and Tilak Verma added 42 runs for the second wicket. Sudarshan then added 68 runs with captain KL Rahul and scored his second consecutive 50 in the process. That's it in this edition of DD India Live, but let us know your thoughts on the news of the day. You can connect with us on Facebook, X and also Instagram. We'll be back with more news as it breaks here on DD India. I'm Preeti Kaur signing off, and from all of us here in Delhi, thanks for watching DD India Live.